Hey, welcome back, everyone. Happy Memorial Day weekend. Also, there was a very tragic shooting. I'm sure many of you saw it happen in Texas, and I want to talk about kind of my take on where things are at with this. I want to dive into some of the key points that I believe, in my analysis, agree with me, disagree with me. I really believe this has debunked one of the main arguments for gun control. I'll be explaining this. I also want to give some background on information I have gotten on the shooting and police protocol and where things are at with that, and kind of give you all of an overview, and also kind of step back a bit and explain, well, what is normal protocol in cases like this? Did they follow normal protocol? I'll be detailing it. Also, I'm going to have a special guest on today. You might know him, Trevor Loudon. I'm sure many of you enjoyed our last episode we had. Trevor agreed to come back on because there's there's a political game, frankly, being played right now. We saw this get played in the Buffalo shooting. Frankly, we saw it get played in the Christchurch shooting. The shooters involved in those incidents were not right wing by any means. And frankly, many of these people are not right wing by any means. But for some reason, they're being used to justify this whole right wing extremist narrative. It appears that both the Christchurch shooter and the shooter in Buffalo were National Bolshevists. I'm going to invite Trevor on to talk about this. We'll be going into it a little bit later. Also, I want to talk about this new domestic terrorism bill that Democrats tried to push but got blocked. Um, Senate Republicans did manage to block it. I'm going to explain what they just tried to do because really they tried creating a thought police branch essentially within several branches of our government, including within some of the federal agencies that could have been monitoring you and I. Folks, I always like to talk about, for those of you on YouTube or on Rumble, just a reminder, after about 20-ish minutes, we're going to jump over exclusively to Epic TV. There's a lot of stuff we can't talk about on YouTube, frankly. Epic TV is our own uncensored platform. We're giving you a free 14-day trial. If you don't have it yet, jump in the description below, grab your free trial, come join us on Epic TV. They can't ban us there for telling the truth. So come check it out. Come to the conversation. We have a great crowd there all the time. Great discussions. And also right now, we still have our 50% off deal. That's the 1-year anniversary still of Epic TV. So 50% off for the whole year. Get it now. Come join the discussion. Come breathe the air of freedom. Join us on Epic TV. All right, that said, I'm going to jump into the first story for tonight because I want to really kind of dig into what just happened in Uvalde, Texas. Now, of course, there was a recent shooting. Let me detail exactly what happened. But I want to really dig into one point in particular, which is one of the biggest arguments with gun control is, well, why do you need a gun if the police can protect you? Well, we saw some of the real holes in that, which is, well, normal 15-minute response time, and then whether or not they can protect you after that is still kind of iffy. I'm going to be detailing what actually happened with this based on what we currently know. So let me show you a story here. This is Epic Times reporting. It's the timeline of the Texas school shooting, what we know so far. I'm going to give some caveats to this a bit later, but this is what we know so far. It says here, a mass shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, resulted in the deaths of 19 children and 2 teachers on May 24th. At least 17 others, including children, sustained non-life-threatening injuries. The massacre is the country's second deadliest K-12 school shooting on record, following the 2012 shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary in Newton, Connecticut. Authorities identified Salvador Romas, 18 years old, as the shooter responsible for the attack. He was shot and killed about 90 minutes after he arrived at the school around 11:30 a.m. that day. Now, jumping a bit further, I won't go over the whole thing. Ramos posted again, he was posting on Twitter saying that he was intending to shoot his grandma first and then go to the school and shoot people there. Of course, these were alleged messages he had on Facebook. I'm sorry. Again, maybe something that they might try to use to justify some kind of social media monitoring even further. But it continues that Ramos shot at 2 witnesses outside a funeral home after he crashed his car near the school across the street before he continued toward the school. Now, also the Texas DPS around this time, that's their, dispatch service. I'm sorry. Texas Dispatch Service around this time received calls from local law enforcement that Romas was making entry into the school. The school resource officer, the school guard, there were early reports that he had exchanged gunfire with this individual. The individual apparently confronted somebody else, but not Romas. In fact, the security officer passed right by Romas. The 18-year old shooter then entered the west side of Robb Elementary School. The door had been propped open by one of the teachers, so the door was left open. The suspect began shooting into a room, either room 111 or room 112. Officers then entered and engaged him soon after that. A quote here says, this is according to McCraw. Now, it says there was plenty of officers to do whatever needed to be done, with one exception. The incident commander inside believed they needed more equipment and more officers to do a tactical breach at that point. Officers exchanged gunfire with him. Some were grazed by bullets. The officers retreated. Romas was then barricaded in this room with many people who were either injured or dying. Now, the commander believed, they're saying that, it moved from a active shooter incident to a barricaded suspect incident. I'll explain what that means in a bit, but let me just finish the main story first, then I'll go into some of my own analysis on this. Now, as he was in this room with people who were injured, kids who were injured or dead at that time, a 911 caller said that she was in one of these rooms. That was room 112, where Romas had entered. Now, at 12:15, Border Patrol, the tactical unit, arrived with their members along with a shield. This was about 90 minutes before it was an off-duty guy who finally breached the building and killed the guy. I'll explain a bit. But the Border Patrol tactical unit arrived at 12:15. They didn't kill him until 12:50, and that was with the shields, with the equipments they needed to go take him out. The female who was on the 911 call said that 8 or 9 students were still alive at this point. Another caller called from the room as well. 3 shots could be heard through the phone, meaning even though it was called a barricaded suspect incident at that point, Romas was still firing shots, which we'll see how the investigation goes. It very likely means it was still an active shooter incident, not barricaded suspect. I'll get to the descriptions of what this means. And not until 12:50 did officers finally breach the classroom and kill the suspect. There's some stories right now emerging on who the Border Patrol agent, it was a Border Patrol agent who ended up shooting Romas. He apparently had to go rogue to move in and kill Romas, because apparently the officers had been told to basically stand back, wait a bit, and see what happened. It was barricaded suspect at that point. The Border Patrol agent was getting his hair cut allegedly at that point. He got a call from his wife, who was a teacher at the school, alerting him there was an active shooter incident. Get over there. He borrowed a shotgun from the barber, according to early reports. Early reports can change. Borrowed a shotgun, hair half cut, breached the school himself, and then killed Romas, ending the incident. Now, I want to start with a caveat on all of this, which is, don't believe the initial story piece by piece, because things do change, especially with things like this, and especially, frankly, when emotions are so high. I'll give you one example of this, which was the Pulse nightclub shooting. I actually had some phone calls, a phone call with a police officer about this, talking about kind of his analysis on this, stuff, off record, but it was an interesting discussion. The Pulse nightclub shooting is a good example of this. Now, remember, the Pulse nightclub shooting was in Florida, where a jihadist entered a nightclub. Similar incident. It took police a long time to actually take down the suspect. Early media reports claimed that in the gunfire exchange in the Pulse nightclub shooting, right, which was this gay club, that officers had actually killed a lot of people, that officers were, accidentally shooting people in the crossfire. And the media actually blamed a lot of the officers for the deaths in that shooting, rather than the jihadist who carried out this terrorist attack on that building. Now, it actually wasn't until very recently, many, many years later, after the officers involved in that shooting had been, pretty much disgraced, dragged through the mud, and maybe even themselves questioned, well, did I accidentally shoot someone innocent? The ballistics actually came back only very recently and showed that all of the reporting claiming the officers had killed people in the crossfire was actually fake. They found out that the issue was, which should have been frankly in the initial reports, that the shooter in the Pulse nightclub shooting was using the same type of gun and the same ammunition as the police officers, meaning the ballistics were very similar. And so a lot of fake news reports on that, including, frankly, if you still read a lot of news reports, you'll still read the fake information. And so, as a caveat to everything we're talking about on this, I just want to say that things can change over time depending on what information is released. When we're talking about the details of a shooting like this, but I want to dig a bit more into my take on what this means for gun control, what this means for the country, and some of my own personal views on things like this. First off, though, folks, we do have a sponsor tonight. This episode's brought to you by Secure. Over 155 million Americans are affected by data leaks in 2020. The average American had their data stolen about 4 times over the past year. People get anxious because they can't protect their online data or activity, becoming more important, frankly. But now there's a new email and messenger app called Secure. That's Secur. They can give privacy and security for sending emails and messages, becoming ever more important, really, especially as they're trying to roll out these new national security protocols that might monitor American citizens. Now, Secure's data centers are hosted in Switzerland and their servers. That's important because Switzerland has the strictest data privacy laws in the world, and they're also not subject to the Cloud Act, which means you're protected from that type of monitoring. Secure does not ask for your phone number. It does not mine your data. It does not upload your contacts like many other applications tend to do, meaning you're protected from that type of monitoring as well. Now, in this way, you're protected from hackers also getting onto your phone, and you have full privacy while you're on the app. Now, for those of you interested, it's $5 for the messenger or $10 for the email and messenger package. You can visit secure.com today for a free 7-day trial, where you can use the promo code Joshua to get 25% off. And big thanks out to Secure for sponsoring tonight's episode. Now, let me dig into a couple problems with the story as it's coming out right now. Now, first of all, one of the big arguments right now is, well, did the police make a bad call? Did they make a bad call by not entering the room, taking out the suspect? Did they make a bad call by waiting, really over an hour before they killed him? This is basically where it's at. Now, let me explain what the police are saying first. So the officer in charge deemed it, and they're walking this back now. I should note they're walking this back now. But initially, this is what they did. They said that it had moved from an active shooter incident to a barricaded suspect incident. Now, active shooter means the person is in the process of shooting. He or she is still a violent threat, killing people and so on. When it's an active shooter incident, the officers, they move and they take down an individual no matter what happens. Their training is they're made to basically put their emotions on the back burner. They're trained to deal with extreme trauma, people injured, stepping over bodies, anything, terrible stuff. They are trained to deal with that and to do, single focus, put emotion on the back burner until they take out the suspect. If it's active shooter, that is what the job is. If it's barricaded suspect, it's actually a very different protocol. Barricaded suspect is they basically put up a perimeter, make sure the individual doesn't leave the area where he or she has been barricaded, and then they work on a negotiation process. For example, if there's injured people in there, they might try to negotiate with the shooter and say, hey, help us get these people out. Life is worth living, that kind of thing, right? They will try to negotiate to rescue people who might be injured in the room with the individual and so on. Now, it seems like it was a serious bad call based on the reporting we currently have. And again, I should note that reporting may change because there were some reported shots fired still continuing as Romas was barricaded in that room. 3 shots at least heard over the phone. And again, details are still emerging, meaning that it was, not a barricaded suspect incident. It was still an active shooter incident. And the fact that police did not move in, if in fact these reports are accurate, would mean that they were basically waiting while people were getting shot, which actually would be pretty serious. There's also a couple other problems they're having right now, which has to do with a lot of the social pressure on police, because a lot of officers have been quitting their jobs because of the Black Lives Matter, these Antifa narratives, ACAB, all cops are bastards, that kind of thing. Police have a hard time doing their jobs in general, and so they're very demoralized. For example, you might be dealing with activist DAs in many states, where the district's attorneys might throw out a case where an individual might have committed a serious crime and still get off. In fact, right before this happened, there was a rapper who shot police officers and got off with nothing. I mean, wild stuff. You had a terrorist attack in New York where a black individual posting on the internet and posting videos himself talking about his intent to carry out violent acts against white people, racial motivated crimes, really is not being charged as such. And the media kind of threw the whole thing on the back burner. You're dealing with stuff like this. A lot of officers are quitting their jobs. And this has a few different effects. One of them is that it means officers are more demoralized. They're less motivated to actually do their job because if they shoot the guy, what's going to happen, right? Imagine, for example, the officers move in and shoot the shooter. What happens, right? Well, you can look at some exact cases of this, where if the shooter is part of a protected race or protected class by the media, the officers might get labeled the bad guys. We saw this, for example, with the Boston Marathon bomber, where the individual who launched the attack and killed an 8-year-old kid, with the bombing, blew up and murdered an 8-year-old child, made the front page of Rolling Stone in a very glamorous looking photo. Right, the media praised the guy, made him look like he was like a martyr, basically. You had Washington Post talking about the heads of ISIS as being a austere religious scholar. The media will glorify individuals like this when the narrative fits their interest. And so officers have, a wariness, I'd say, of engaging people like that, because shooting an individual at this point, if the individual wants to get painted by the media in a certain way, will get the officers themselves attacked. Now, what is the effect of all of this? It means that the departments have to open up their protocol. They have to open up their standards a lot more. They can't hold themselves to the same level of scrutiny when hiring officers that they used to, because they need to fill positions. Now, there's also other impacts on budget cuts, such as illegal immigration, defunding police movements, especially as it relates to schools. And then, especially as it relates to the school guards, because a lot of people are saying, well, why wasn't the school guard on site? Why didn't the school guard engage this individual? It's because of budget cuts that in many places you have one school guard working at like 18 different schools. And so, yes, you'll have a school guard at this school or that school, but that school guard is dividing his or her time between like 18 or more, or maybe a little less, different schools. And part of the reasons for this is that school budgets, again, have been defunded a lot. In fact, some schools, because of the, Black Lives Matter movements and so on, have actually been pulling them out and saying that makes the children feel unsafe. But in addition to that, they're having to divert their budgets for things like English as second language and other things, because they have a lot of illegal immigrants coming here, kids and so on, who need special classes within the schools that they don't currently have. So they have to create additional resources, divert additional resources to help care for these kids who are, coming here illegally. So lower budgets affect safety as well. Now, a lot of people are comparing this to, again, firemen. If you're a fireman, of course, and you decide not to go in, to a burning building because you might get burned. People are saying the same thing about the police, because one of the arguments coming out early was, well, they didn't want to get shot. Well, if it was a barricaded suspect incident, the officers on the ground wouldn't have been the ones to make that call. That would have been the officer in charge. The commander is going to be the one on the hot seat for all this. But at the same time, too, as I mentioned, you also deal with the whole, Boston bomber type scenario, where the killer himself might get labeled as, the martyr, essentially, as we've seen happen. The other thing you have to understand is that officers are human too. I'm not trying to defend it if they, of course, if they were letting kids get shot and killed during this time and bleed out. I think the whole thing is messy and pretty horrifying. But it reminds me of Pirates of Penzance, that play, if you've ever seen it, where this town's getting attacked by pirates, and the town goes to the local police department, and they're telling the police department, go fight the pirates to death and glory. And the police are like horrified; they have to go die essentially for the whole town. A lot of people, of course, have different levels of bravery. Let's put it that way, and not everyone's willing to put their lives in the line. Unfortunately, even to rescue kids in this case. There's also the issue of emotion getting in the way, and I can say, as a parent, moving through a school where there's kids who are in serious danger, and you walk past a classroom and imagine seeing your own child like calling out to you saying, hey, please get me out of here. A lot of people would have trouble with that. So these are people too. These are still humans. Not defending it, of course, if again they were standing down when there were kids getting shot in that classroom, but Details are still emerging on that. And again, that'd be mostly the commander's call if he had moved the incident from active shooter to barricaded suspect. I mean, I can tell you, and again, the individual who did finally take him down did it by disobeying orders. And I'd like to believe I'd be one of those individuals too who would disobey orders and take him down as well. But you know, I think everybody would say that, frankly. Now, I think the main thing this story is revealing, though, is this, and this is my take on this, is that it's really debunked one of the main arguments of the gun control lobby, which is if you have police, why do you need guns? They're trying to say basically the narrative is right. The narrative is that if why would people need guns? Why do they need to defend themselves? The government is there. The government's your greatest protector, as many socialists would say. Why do you need guns? Well, here's the reason. It takes them 15 minutes, usually on average, to respond to a call. And that's if you're like a priority. I mean, in some places, it's even worse than that, especially if you don't have a normal police department. You have to you have to work through like sheriff's deputies or so on. And they're extremely understaffed, and backup for one individual might be 2 hours away in some parts of the country. Police typically respond to and investigate crimes after they have been committed. And that's really what happened with this, why the officer made the assessment that it moved from, again, active shooter to barricaded suspect. The assessment, it seems to be the case, and they're saying it's a bad assessment now. They're admitting that was a bad assessment. But this was the assessment, is that basically the shooting was over. The individual carried out the killings he intended to carry out, and they moved to a barricaded suspect incident. Within those 15 minutes it takes an officer to respond, typically the crime has already been carried out. And so they are reactive and more of an investigative force, not something to try to save you from something currently ongoing. And that's where, again, the gun control argument comes in. I'd say pro-gun argument comes in, is that self-defense is our own business, not the business of the government. Now, of course, people are trying to paint this in many different ways. The gun grab narratives have tried painting this in their own way, and I think we're going to hear a lot more on this. But let me go a bit more into this. Now, how is the White House responding to this? Let me show you a report. This is Biden, Epic Times. He, of course, went there. But right before all this happened, let me show you something very important. It's that Biden, just before all this, was attacking police. As far as I'm concerned, causing the very problem that led to a lot of these things in the first place. Epic Times reported this, that President Joe Biden signed an executive order on Wednesday that sets broad new policing standards for federal law enforcement agencies. Now, this is federal, like FBI and stuff. The order, they say, does not affect state and local police departments, but encourages them to follow suit. Among other things, the order puts into place a police misconduct database, mandates body cameras, limits no-knocks, bans chokeholds unless deadly force is authorized. Now, again, you could argue whether this is needed or not. A lot of departments already have these kinds of protocols, which is why a lot of them would say this is totally unnecessary. But for them, this is another blow, which is demoralizing the police and making them not want to engage on things like this. Now, on the note of Obama, who also responded to this, he's making it like an anti-cop narrative as well. Let me show you what Obama said. This is Breitbart here. It says Barack Obama uses Texas shooting to memorialize George Floyd. This is Obama's exact quote. He says, as we grieve the children of Uvalde today, we should take the time to recognize that 2 years have passed since the murder of George Floyd under the knee of a police officer. His killing stays with us all to this day, especially those who loved him. In the aftermath of this murder, he's saying murder, not murderers, a new generation of activists rose up to channel their anguish into organized action, launching a movement to raise awareness of systemic racism and the need for criminal justice and police reform. He's talking to parents where, again, 17 kids were just murdered and 2 teachers. And he's telling them that somehow the police are, the evil ones in this. He's not condemning the murderer. He's not condemning a guy for going and shooting 17 kids. He's pushing his race narratives. And then he has the nerve to plug his My Brother's Keepers alliance and its reimagining police pledge. Again, frankly, I would say this is the reason stuff like this is happening in the first place. Narratives like this pushed by the very people who are trying to tell you otherwise. Now, I want to go a bit more into this, but it's getting a bit late, so I want to jump over to Epic TV, and there's a lot, frankly, we can talk about there that I can't see on YouTube without risking getting banned. So, folks, come join us over on YouTube. And I want to go a bit deeper into this. Then we're going to invite on Trevor Loudon in just a bit. So come join us. Let me show you a quick trailer, though, over on Epic TV. We'll jump into Epic TV. Let me show you a quick trailer, though. We recently spoke with Brandon Strzok, speaking of, well, federal government framing people and stuff, about the real story of January 6th, because Brandon Strzok of the Walkaway Movement says he was framed. Let me show you this. We'll jump over to Epic TV.
It's been argued time and again by many January 6 defendants that they don't feel like they're capable of getting a fair trial in Washington, D.C. If you are a vocal Trump supporter who questioned the 2020 election and you're going before a D.C. judge and jury, you're going to be punished for making the decision to support Donald Trump and question the election.
All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen. They opened the door! We're going in.
So you were facing well over 20 years in prison if you didn't admit to something that you don't believe you did.
Well, if I didn't accept the plea deal that they were offering, yes. And so I did accept the plea deal that they offered. And it's been devastating for a number of reasons.
Yeah, so that's Brandon Strzok telling the real story of what happened. He believes, he's saying he was framed and he was forced to admit to a crime he did not commit on January 6th. Watch that on Epic TV. And that said, let's jump over exclusively now. Get your free subscription. Come join us. And again, we have a deal right now, 50% off. We're going to continue the discussion on Epic TV. We'll see you there. All right, folks, I want to go a bit more into this shooting and then a bit of what's happening right now with these kind of how the Democrats are trying to use these shootings, well, for many different political purposes.